took him to the pediatrician, and they finally said to take him to a dermatologist. And they said that they felt that it was psoriasis. And they gave me all kinds of creams, and of course nothing was helping. And as he got a little bit older, it started spreading. Dr. Pagano told us about this whole treatment, and whether it would work or not, I didn't know. But he said, just give me 3 months. And if in 3 months it wouldn't work, you can have the whole problem back. And it worked. It worked miraculously.
It took 3 months, and it's 7 years now, and she's still completely healed over.
I had psoriasis for 14 years. I was at a conference at Wagner College on Staten Island. A very charming woman came over to me and was looking at me picking some skin off my hands, which became my nervous tick, and said, young man, there's a cure for that. And I said, oh, yes, madam, I'm familiar with that, and I'm in it. I'm up at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. And she looked at me very sadly and said, young man, you're never going to find it up there. So I figured, okay, I'll humor her, and I said, where? And she said, you write to Virginia Beach, the Edgar Cayce Foundation. They have an answer.
Well, this is a very special occasion for me. Been preparing for it for about 6 months. I remember last summer I was on the beach. I was standing there looking at the ocean, and I got a tap on the shoulder, and I didn't even know who was behind me. All I heard was this voice, like it came from a cave. It said, would like you to speak at next year's Congress. And I was turning around to say, no, I'm really not interested. I'm too busy. And it was Vic Reefer. And when I saw the size of him, I said, sign me up. A mouse never argues with a lion. So it was my pleasure to accept this invitation. And we're going to bring you up to date on many, many things. But, I was supposed to appear last year. I was all ready. I was in the wings. My speech was prepared. But nobody asked me. So, but the last time I did speak at the Congress, I guess they must have really liked me. Because here it is, only 25 years later, and I'm back already. Before I start a talk, I like to have sort of like a good luck charm before I start the evening. My good luck charm in this audience has always been the very beautiful, wonderful lady who none of us would be here without her. Because for 40 years, over 40 years, she stood by Edgar Cayce and took down the information as came forth through him. I would like to honor Ms. Gladys Davis Turner. Gladys. I call her the beautiful lady from Virginia Beach. Well, what are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about a disease that afflicts at least 4 to 6 million Americans with 150,000 new cases each year. That was the statistic by the HEW report on psoriasis 10 years ago. Every time I write to them for the latest statistics, I get the same figure, the same number. But I heard it said by one of the top dermatologists in the country that the count could be as much as 12 million. And it's on the rise. And the thing is, it's beginning to affect very young children as well as adults. So what is psoriasis? Psoriasis is a condition of the skin, apparently, in which it sloughs off much more usually than normal. You see, your skin, your layer of skin, sloughs off every 28 days, roughly 30 days, at a normal rate. You don't even see it. It's microscopic. You shower and all that. Well, you can imagine the plight of people with psoriasis because their skin sloughs off every 2 or 3 days. And it sloughs off to the point where it becomes inflamed, scales form by the gross. I mean, they get up out of bed and they have to scoop scales up in many times. One case that I had, I'll call him Mr. R, had it so bad on the elbows of his arms that they were able to peel it off in one big piece and crack it in half like a piece of corrugated cardboard. This is roughly what could happen in cases of psoriasis. I first encountered my psoriasis cases 25 years ago in Denver. I made friends with a man from New Jersey, and he assured me that he's tried everything for it, and there just was a living hell for him. I took an interest in it. And every time I got any information at all, I'd file it away and just keep building up my file on psoriasis. But I was already a member of the A.R.E. since I was in college. And around 1975, it seems that that's when the files on psoriasis were all put together in Volume 1 and Volume 2. So I got hold of them, and I worked out a workable formula, so to speak. And it wasn't long before my first case came in. And he is the first case you'll see on the film that I produced. The man had it for 15 years. He went on the Cayce regimen with the help of his wife, followed it to the letter, and within 7 days, the change was unbelievable. We followed through, and within 3 months, after suffering with it for 15 years, he was completely clear of his psoriasis, and it had never returned. We followed the works of Edgar Cayce. Now, from a medical point of view, it's looked upon as a surface skin disease. They try to find reasons why. They know why the skin proliferates this way, but they do not know the cause, the underlying cause of it. They know what happens to the skin. They know how people suffer, and they have devised many ways to alleviate the problem to a great extent. But they've never come upon the cause, and they've never come upon a true cure. But Edgar Cayce gives us a clue. Because years and years ago, when people with psoriasis started to come to Edgar Cayce, he went not on the outside of the body, but on the inside. In the Edgar Cayce works, it brings out that it is basically an intestinal problem. Therefore, if you treat the skin on the outside, you will get relief, but you'll never get rid of the cause. You've got to go on the inside. And only in the works of Cayce have I found, and I've gone through many books through Materia Medica, I never found anyone who looked inside the body for the cause of psoriasis. So basically, Edgar Cayce is saying what you see on the outside is poisons that if they stayed on the inside, a septicemia would develop and it would threaten the life of the patient. So the body, in its attempt to rid itself of these poisons, go through the skin in a vicarious manner because your kidneys and liver can no longer handle it, handle the toxins that build up in your system. When that occurs, another defense mechanism goes into work, the skin, to throw it off. And what happens is the psoriatic lesion. Other people may get eczema because eczema, the cause and cure according to Cayce, is the same thing. And I've had experience with that to prove that it is so. So he's bringing a whole new dimension on the cause and cure of a disease that goes way back into ancient times. Probably centuries ago, psoriasis, because of its hideous nature, was probably mistaken for leprosy and vice versa. People would have to wear their clothes torn purposely and ragged and yelling through the streets, unclean, unclean. This is the way it used to be in Europe when people had a skin disease like that. And psoriasis has been traced back possibly to the book of Job. So we're dealing with an ancient skin disease. And Cayce is coming forth with a possible answer to it. Why some people get it and others do not, that may be a mystery we may never understand. Because the same possible causes may give one eczema, another ulcers, another migraine headache, whatever. The point is we're dealing with one specific disease. About 3 years ago, I have to tell you this story. A black man came into my office, and he had it from head to toe. He couldn't even sit on the chair, because when he sat on the chair and leaned back, he said it was like a swarm of bees biting into his back. He was 68 years old, and he had it for 30 years. We'll call him Mr. Willie A. I was very doubtful as to whether I should ever take this patient, simply because I didn't want to give him false hope. Even though I had countless successes, this case was so incredible that I didn't want to make him think that he was going to get well if I wasn't even sure myself. But he assured me that he had been everywhere. After 30 years, he's been through just about every type of therapy available. So I took him reluctantly. And I told him that, Willie, I said, I can't promise you anything. I can only tell you what to do. I can't follow you around the streets. You have to follow what I say, and maybe we'll get a result, maybe not. He was willing to try. Well, Willie A. turned out to be the fastest cure that I have ever seen in my life, because in 30 days, his skin was as pure as the day he was born. No more scales. And I have people in the audience here who met him, and they said he stripped down his waist and there wasn't a mark on him. He was 68 years old, and he got married at the age of 70 to a woman who helped him through the whole regimen. And to this day, he's still cured of his psoriasis. And he comes to our meetings and meets the patients. I try to have psoriasis night, in which new patients come to the office, and they met Willie, and he told them, and then that gives them the spur to go on and continue. See, the biggest thing that the patient who follows the Cayce readings has to get into their consciousness is patience and persistence. You cannot expect the result in a few days or a few weeks if you've suffered with the disease for 30 years. And yet here's a man who did it in a month. But most of the time, the patient has got to give me 3 months to 6 months to see if you're going to respond. And then I can't follow them around. They have to follow the rules as given. There are many, many factors involved. One is your diet. The second is adjustments of the spine. I'll explain why later. Certain herbal teas, particularly saffron and American yellow saffron and what's the other tea? Chamomile, mullein tea, saffron, and slippery elm. Slippery elm bark, right. They are the 4 main teas that are used for psoriasis. The reason being, the trouble inside the body, as brought forth by Cayce, is that the intestinal walls become too thin. Now, what happens when your intestinal walls become too thin? Toxins that should ordinarily pass through the body pass through these thin intestinal walls like a process of osmosis. It's then picked up by your lymphatic system, and then your lymphatic system dumps it into your circulatory system. Then the circulatory system goes through your kidney and liver and tries to rid itself, but then it becomes so overwhelming because of the continual adding of toxins that finally the skin has to take over, because your normal organs of elimination cannot handle the load. So why do the thin intestinal walls occur? Well, one reason is chronic constipation. I have found this in at least 70 to 80% of my patients. They have poor elimination to begin with. So what happens? The colon becomes engorged, and there's like a backup pressure all the way back up into the system. Do you know, and this is hard, this is going to be hard for you to believe, but I had one very young, very nice young lady, had psoriasis for many years. She was only about 28. And we found out that she had an elimination problem, but she never knew she had one. She never evacuated but once every week or 10 days. We couldn't believe this, and I have this all recorded on tape. We said, and we had our gathering. She said, well, it's because every member in her family don't believe in going to the bathroom. Now, this is wild, I know, but I assure you it's God's truth. I said, what do you mean? And then I said, how come? She said, I don't like to go to the bathroom. So what happens? The body retains all that and seeps in and gets into your system, and auto-intoxication takes place. Since she has learned what Cayce said, at least 1 or 2 evacuations a day is normal for most people, most everybody, her eliminations improved, and subsequently her psoriasis has calmed down a great deal, and this has improved over many, many months. But she was actually taught not to go to the bathroom unless you're almost dying. Now that's extreme. I realize that. But the thing about constipation, in bringing about all the ills, you see, the reason this lecture tonight is going to appeal to everybody here is because these principles that we're talking about apply to several diseases, particularly arthritis, eczema, rare cases like scleroderma, things in which the general body, the debilitating diseases, the insidious diseases, you don't even know they're happening, but just as sure as a bullet is fired at you, it's going to get you, only it'll take a little time. So you see, these principles we talk about appeal to your general health. The Cayce diet is basically the Cayce basic diet. But I've improved upon it when I found certain culprits. For instance, the Cayce diet does not say you should stay off tomatoes. It's in the diet, but I found the opposite in my work, in that tomatoes is hell to the psoriatic. But then I did find Cayce in one of his readings explain why. He said that you must never have tomatoes unless they are eaten ripened on the vine. Now that might make the difference. Every tomato you see in a supermarket arrives green or is on its way green, so that by the time it gets to the supermarket, it's red. But it was picked green. So you see, that could be one explanation, or it could be the acid content within it. The chemistry involved in psoriasis is that you've got to get away from the acid formers and more on the alkaline formers. In general, the alkaline formers are your vegetables, fruits. They not only are alkaline, but they are fiber, and they allow your bowels to work better and eliminate these poisons from your system. Whereas the acids have the opposite effect. They have the effect of infecting the system in general, unless you're very young. As you get older, you should get on the alkaline side. The formula that Edgar Cayce gives is 80% alkaline foods to 20% acid foods. This is the basic general formula. So if you stick to that and stay away from your sweets, tomatoes, stay away from beef, red meats in particular, and concentrate on fish, fowl, and lamb, but never fried, you have the basic idea of how to rid yourself of many of the body's ills. And God forbid you ever come down with a psoriatic problem. You know, I could remember when I used to find cases in psoriasis in the very beginning that I used to cringe when I saw how bad they were. Now I think that I have seen about the worst that has been on the American scene anyway. And it doesn't bother me in the least. I says, you ready to get rid of it? If they call from California, I tell them now, get on a plane and get over here. I have no qualms about telling them that there is something for them. So this is what we're going to learn about tonight, what Edgar Cayce had to say about psoriasis. The results following the readings vary, but most everybody who follows it gets the results they want. A certain percentage get to a certain plateau, and then it stops. And then another percentage that X the unknown reason, the minority, no results are obtained. Perhaps the reasons there could be emotional. They could be things we haven't touched upon, and I don't have the time to work with them to find out what their reason is. And then it could be that many patients simply don't have the faith that goes with following a certain regimen. When you have faith and belief in something, especially when you meet patients who have cleared up, it has a tremendous effect upon whether you're going to respond or not. Because even though those nerves from your brain go to every organ in your body, the brain still has the power to cut it off. And healing cannot do it. Faith is a powerful thing. It reminds me of what people will do to think, you know, what faith can do. These two nuns were driving down the highway in New Hampshire. And as they were driving down, their car starts puttering, you know, and they come to a roll and a stop. They ran out of gas. So they looked at each other. What are we going to do? And they're in the middle of nowhere. So they look over the horizon, and there they see, way off in the distance, is a gas station. So I said, well, let's go down there. So they go down there to the gas station. They said, look, we're stuck up on the road, and we need some gas. So the attendant said, well, he says, I wish I could help you, but I can't leave the garage. He says, I'm the only one here. She says, I can give you some gas. So he said, well, we don't have anything to put it in. So he looks around. He said, well, look, sister. He says, if you don't mind, he said, the last car that was here had a bunch of kids in it, and they left this little potty. So he said, if you don't mind, we'll put a little gas in the potty, and you can go and put it. He said, well, we don't care, whatever, to get us going. So they put the gas in the potty. And they go back up to the car, and they open up the tank, and they start pouring the gas into the thing. And just as they get to the last drop, this truck comes barreling down, and the driver jams on the brakes, and he yells, oh, sister, I only wish I had half the faith you have. So don't underestimate the power of faith. It could do wonders. And we're going to bring you now up to date on some of the things that I've done in psoriasis. I produced a film strip. Some of you have seen it, but most of you have not. A film strip showing you the sequence of events that took place following the Edgar Cayce reading. It took 4 years to put this film together. So, if we may have the screen down, we'll go through it. It's about 20 minutes. You're going to see some pictures that you never dreamed possible. All right? A wrap-up of about four or 5 years of research. And since that film was produced, I think it's interesting to know that from 1931 to 1980, there became 18,000 members in the A.R.E. And now, from 1980 to 1985, the number is approximately 47,000. So within a 5-year period, it doubled, which tells you something. It tells you that we're entering a spiritual age. And the works of Edgar Cayce is almost a forerunner to that age. Now what you've learned about psoriasis now, there are just as many perplexing problems that still have to be answered. For instance, what about the patient who does have faith, knows it will work, tries it all, goes to all their treatments, follows the regimen completely, no results. And another person who does not believe in Cayce, never heard of Cayce, is lackadaisical about the regimen sometimes, and they completely clear up. I mean, these are perplexing problems. They're not usual, but they do occur. I want to tell you about one particular patient when it comes to the importance of elimination. This man was about the only patient where we did not think he was going to live through the night. He had psoriasis so badly that he had to stay in almost a position like this because he could not stretch his arm out. His contractions of his skin was so bad that if he did that, he would have ripped his skin wide open. This man was in an explosion 4 years prior to my seeing him. And from this explosion, he saw his friend just pasted right up against the wall like a dish rag and dropped down. Believe it or not, the friend cleared up. He was all right after a while. But about 2 weeks later, this gentleman developed a lesion right on the surface of his hand. And it began to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Finally, they went to the dermatologist and they immediately diagnosed it as psoriasis. But it never let up. It grew to every facet of his body, including his eyes, in the inner aspects of his mouth, which is rare, but it does happen. This man, his nails, his hands were totally eaten up. He couldn't use his hands at all. His wife told me that it's driving her crazy. In the morning, when he gets out of bed, she has to scoop up the scales to it's like a bucket full. And this is another thing about psoriasis, the burden it places upon those who are taking care of the psoriatic patient. Constant cleaning, constant vacuuming. There's always that, what I call skin dust, all over the house. You sit down on a sofa and poof, up you see these scales. And there's nothing you can do about it except continual cleaning. So anyway, this man decided to come to a friend, his son, decided to try. Obviously, they've gone through what we call PUVA treatments. They've gone through the methotrexate, which almost destroyed his liver and kidneys. And he tried everything known to modern science. So he came to me, and again, I was very reluctant to take him because he was so desperate. But part of the therapy was the high colonic irrigation. So I sent him to New York. He didn't even know what it was. He was an old-fashioned Italian man. And he said, well, what is it? And I explained it to him, and he says, oh, I don't have to do that. He was very reluctant to go to begin with. But I finally talked him into it. While he was having the high colonic irrigation, lo and behold, something pops in his intestinal tract, in the large intestine, which scared the living hell out of him. He jumped off the table, ran out of the room, and the poor girl, the nurse who attended him, just burst into tears, wondering why he panicked so much. Well, he never went back again. He said, he'll never do it again. Something happened. What broke in here? Well, you can imagine how I was sweating. She was sweating, and he was aggravated. So I called her up and asked her what in God's name happened. And she was in tears. She says, doctor, she says, I broke up an impaction. It was like cement. And the waters got in there and broke it loose. Well, he would never think of going for another one. But I'll tell you something. That man, who's about 75 years old, from that moment on, he started clearing up. And to this day, he hasn't got a lesion on his body. He made me. Now, he could not use his hands. And yet, after several months, after the first colonic broke that impaction out, so his eliminating system was, if I may use the term, uncorked, he was able to eliminate properly and slowly, took about a year, he began to clear up gradually because he wasn't retaining the poisons in his system. Evidently, this explosion must have caused a shock and a constriction of his colon that it blocked his normal channel of elimination. Well, when I talk to him about this, he won't believe it. So no way did that help me. No, it did not help. Yet his son knows it, his wife knows it. Everybody knows that when he got that colonic, from that moment on, he started getting well. Proof again that it's the retention of the toxins within the system. That's one way. My own colleagues, chiropractors or osteopaths, cannot see the connection between spinal adjustments and how it may help a psoriatic. I'm going to explain it to you. And if there are any physicians in the audience, I think you'll bear with me, and I think you'll concede that there is reason to believe this. Edgar Cayce said, concentrate, if you remember, on the 6th and 7th dorsal vertebrae, plus the 3rd cervical, 9th dorsal, and 4th lumbar. Now, from your anatomy books, the 6th and 7th dorsal, which is right between your shoulder blades, have nerve fibers that go to, eventually, they go to your liver, kidneys, and a whole array of nerve plexuses through a greater splanchnic nerve, which relays in the celiac plexus, and then goes down into all these nerves. That if these nerves are not operating properly, like the electrical current is not getting to them, Cayce says a constriction of the blood circulation takes place, and in time, the walls of the intestines begin to break down. That in many, many cases, in studying volume 1 and 2, I came to find out that sometimes spinal subluxations is the basic cause of the psoriasis because it cuts off the nerve supply. The intestinal wall does not get the normal energies of nerves, breaks down, the toxins seep through. So there's where your adjustments come in handy. The colonics clear out the alimentary canal so that you can eliminate properly. And the third most important thing is the diet. If you keep putting in acids and poisons in your system, especially fats and sweets, then your body cannot throw them off. So the wrap-up is primarily the adjustments, the colonic irrigations or enemas. You don't necessarily have to have a colonic. Some people don't like them. Some people can't have them or they're not convenient. But enemas applied periodically have done just as many wonders as I've seen. But sometimes only a colonic can do the job. And then, of course, your adjustments of the spine, concentrating on your diet, and you've got the basic remedy for this dermatological enigma, which has plagued mankind for centuries. Isn't it amazing how simplicity can be the answer to some of the most perplexing problems? So in putting all this together, it took me another 4 years to figure this one out. And I call it the key. Look to the spine for the cause of psoriasis, and you look forever in vain. No, excuse me. Cancel that. Cancel that. Look to the skin for the cause of psoriasis, and you look forever in vain. Treat the skin only in the case of psoriasis, and the cause you forever retain. For the outward appearance is only a sign your intestines are thin. Look deeper, I tell you, look deeper than skin, for the key, my dear patient, is pollution within. Now, as they say in Texas, you ain't seen nothing yet. Who could forget the wistful look on this beautiful boy, Andrew? Well, how did Andrew pan out in this whole thing? Am I in people's way? I'll try not to be. No, maybe I'll just sit here. Then I won't be in the way. Okay, here's Andrew when he gave us his little talk when he was 5 years old. This is the way his hands were. constantly getting worse each passing year. Had it for 4 years. Then, about 7 months later, his hands were clear. And then I didn't see him for 2 years. And I took pictures of his hands, and 2 years later, they're still completely clear. You remember his chest? How that looked? Then 4 months in April, his chest was clear. Then I saw him 2 years after that, and his chest is still clear, which would indicate to us that a healing of the intestinal walls have taken place and there's more of a permanent nature to it. You see? Now, here's Andrew's mother talking with Andrew. And you know, this is a psychic research center, right? Wouldn't it be wonderful to know how they are today, 6 years later, after this was taken? So I wonder if you would all help me with something. You know what teleportation is? Well, teleportation means, and believe it, this is no joke. They've been working on it for years, that you can molecularly disintegrate a body or a substance or a solid, send it through the ethers, and have it reassembled someplace else. In California, according to some people, they had already accomplished it with a rose and a glass of milk. I remember reading that years ago. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we knew how Andrew and his mother were? So I would say, let's all try it. Concentrate. Look at them. Look at them. Close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. Go ahead. You know, I think I blew it. I thought it would work. Well, anyway, let's have the house lights. Ladies and gentlemen, from New York, teleported here is Andrew and his mother, Ronnie. We'll have to pass it back and forth. Okay? So, we talked about this day many years ago, didn't we?
Oh, for years we talked about it. It was going to happen one day. You were going to have a film, and you were going to have all the healing, and I can't believe it's here.
How do you feel about? I can't call you little Andrew anymore. My gosh. So.
Well,
Yeah, hold on.
well, when I was little, I remember when we used to talk. He used to tell us how he was gonna make a movie, and I was gonna be a movie star. It's gonna be great. And now we're finally here, and it's gonna help a lot of people, and I think it's really good.
I'd tell him anything to stop him from eating the candy. But you know, Andrew and his mother appeared with me at the United Nations, and they just tore the house down. When he got up there and showed his chest is all clear, and his hands are all clear, right? Great. So Ronnie, give us a rundown on what you've been through before you started with Edgar Cayce.
Well, when Andrew was 1.5 years old, he had a toenail that just didn't look right. And we took him to the pediatrician, and they finally said to take him to a dermatologist. And they said that they felt that it was psoriasis. And they gave me all kinds of creams, and of course nothing was helping. And as he got a little bit older, it started spreading. So we took him to more dermatologists, and of course they gave us names in New York City, and we went there. And they told us to buy a 4-foot-high sun lamp and put cortisone creams on him. And we went into the city every week, and he got all kinds of ointments. We took him, that didn't work. We took him to psychic healers. We were trying to do anything that would help him and that would not hurt him in later years, because they kept telling us that cortisones, I wouldn't know what would be 30 or 50 years down the line. And here he was, 4 years old. And at one point, they put him in the hospital for a week. And I stayed with him, and all we did was take sun treatments, and he was in bed. And it was a healthy child put into a sick environment. And he never completely cleared, but after a week, we finally took him home. We just, couldn't have it anymore. And a friend of mine, his aunt, was going to Dr. Pagano for adjustments, and she told him the story about Andrew, that he had psoriasis. And we got his name and number, and I said anything that would be healthy and could not hurt him, as he got older, I would try anything. And when we went there, Dr. Pagano told us about this whole treatment, and whether it would work or not, I didn't know, but he said, just give me 3 months. And if in 3 months it wouldn't work, you can have the whole problem back. So after a time when we found out that there was nothing harmful that would go into him, nothing harmful that would be physically done to him, we just had to try. And it worked. It worked miraculously. Very beginning, which you reminded me of earlier, I forgot that all of a sudden after a couple of weeks he just got completely covered, even worse. And I think I might have been slightly hysterical, what are we doing? It's not working. But after that time it just started clearing up, and it's been clear ever since. He's really been fabulous.
I must admit, I sweated. When they told me how bad he reacted, I had only one answer. Stick to it anyway. Keep going. It might be the body purging itself. That's the only thing I can think of. And she agreed. She bought the idea, and she's continued. I didn't know what else to say. And then he started to clear up, and that was it. It was like a crisis. Right. And then he just continually cleared up. So now nobody minds holding your hand, I'll bet. Andrew, what would you tell a young person your age regarding the treatments and all that?
Well, I would tell them, even if it's a problem and all your friends say things to you and tease you, why can't you have a Coke with us? How come when you have the little class parties, you have to bring in a little bran muffin while we all have cupcakes? I would tell them to stick with it, and even though it's annoying to sleep in all this saran wrap, and when you roll over, you wake up because it's all crinkly. I would tell them to stick with it. I mean, it might be annoying for a time, but you get used to it, and it helps. It clears it all up. It really helps.
Mm-hmm. Good, Andrew. We thank you. You've done a marvelous thing for young people, and Ronnie's devotion was so important in this, and her husband. You need the patience of a saint, but they stuck with him all the way. Every single patient that I've had, their loved one, whether it be a husband, a wife, or a girlfriend, or whatever, was behind them 100%. And they're the ones who came in from New York just to be with you tonight. They leave tomorrow morning, going back to the city. So thanks for teleporting here. Okay. Okay. We have the screen, please. Everybody remember this pretty little girl? I remember the first day she came in the office. She was such a pretty girl, and she had these lesions even on her face and even on her scalp, throughout her back. Then remember, in a short time, 3 months after she had it, a year, she was 8.5 years old. Her chest was all clear. Her back was so bad, if you remember, the lesions on her back. Yeah, she had a little curvature in the spine, but she also had these lesions all over her body. 3 months, she's completely clear. Well, you know what's coming next. The other day I called up because we were making arrangements for little Elizabeth. Listen to me. She's now, she was 8.5. Now she's going to be 16. So with the help of Piedmont Airlines, here's beautiful little Elizabeth to meet with you tonight. You can come right up. And her mother, Barbara, is accompanying her. Yeah. Hello, Barbara. Incidentally, I know you may want to ask these people questions, but we're going to have a period in which they all stand up for you, and then you can have a question for any particular one. Keep it in mind, and you'll have a chance to ask them. So I called her up the other day, and this sultry voice gets on the phone, and I say, "Oh, is this the Lazarus home?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, well, would you please put Elizabeth on?" She thought for a minute. She said, this is Elizabeth. Then I looked in the mirror, and I realized that I was getting as old as everybody else. But here she is, and I can remember she was about this high when she first came. I have my hand right on her head. Now look at this beautiful girl. Her hair, she had lesions on her forehead and her face, chest, and her back, and all that. And now she's just as beautiful as ever.
Thanks.
And she's remained that way, right, Barbara?
Yes.
Right? Could you give them an idea of what you went through?
Well, it was just a little easier for me because I knew Ronnie from home, and I got a phone call of how well she did when she heard about Elizabeth. She started with one tiny little lesion that the pediatrician said was eczema, went to a dermatologist, and he used cortisone, and it went away for a day or two and came back. More cortisone, went away for a day or two, came back. We went on to one of the big dermatologists in Manhattan, and he treated her with shots into each lesion in her head. We allowed him to do that twice. And
How many shots?
there were about 60 at a time.
60.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that twice, and we said, no good. And that's when we got the call from someone who knew Ronnie that she was taking Andrew to this nice doctor in Jersey. Why don't we try it? And the same thing, I spoke to my pediatrician. He said there was absolutely nothing to fear in trying this because it was all healthy and no medicine. And
Gee, that's a break. I didn't know that. I mean, he went along with it.
he did,
Oh.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Good.
it was marvelous. And Dr. Pagano is marvelous and dedicated and just a really wonderful guy.
You said that just the way I wanted.
Just the way we paid you to say it.
And as you saw, it took 3 months, and she's been clear since.
That's 7 years. I haven't seen Elizabeth for 7 years till tonight, right? Except when we
Except
spoke
at
at
the
the
UN.
UN. Yeah, she came to the UN also, and shocked the Russians. So tell us how you would advise a young lady your age.
I would tell them to skip over all the other doctors I went to with the shots and everything and just go straight to you because it was torture.
I bet it was.
Definitely was.
Uh-huh. Did you have a problem trying to stick to the diet and, be with your friends and they tempted you to have your potato chips and all that stuff?
Well, at first I guess it was rough because before all this, I guess we were one of the houses with every junk food you can possibly imagine, and then everything was gone after, and it wasn't really that hard. After a while, everybody in my family helped me really. My brothers and my brother and my sisters.
See, the beautiful thing about this is it took 3 months and it's 7 years now and she's still completely healed over. Whereas, yeah, well, more or less, not too much though, right? Which means a healing inside took place.
There
No
are
junk
certain
food.
things I stay
No
away from.
junk food.
Mm-hmm.
That I see. Not in the house.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, you're an inspiration. To any young girl who has the problem, you let them know that they can get rid of it. They don't need it. And you're a perfect explanation or a perfect example of that. So thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Good. Okay. More surprises coming. Okay, curtain down. Where's my hooker? Okay. Now this is a type of psoriasis called guttate. The word guttate means tiny little droplets. Now this young lady had this all over her body, including her face, quite extensively on her face, and chest and legs and backs of her legs and so forth. And it's very interesting what happened with her because we weren't getting any results. We worked, she seemed to improve for a little while, and then all of a sudden she'd get back, a flare-up would take place. Until finally her mother one day accidentally looked underneath her bed. And there were the box of cookies and the candy wrappers and the chewing gum. And the little girl said she she followed through everything. I mean, she'd look you right in the face and say, oh, no, I didn't deviate. But we didn't know where these wrappers came from. So then the mother really laced into her and said, look, you're never going to get well unless you do it. So then she decided, okay. She stuck to it. It took 6 months. And here she is today. And this was taken about 2 years ago. And she's completely clear. Now, this young lady, I have no surprise. She's not with us. It's just that I wanted you to see a different type of psoriasis. And they come in many forms, many types of psoriasis, but they all have the same basic cause, and it's all proliferation of scales. Now, another type that I've encountered was this, what is called common pustular. It's a combination of common and pustular type. Now, this man, you could see his nails were being eaten up as well. And he was extremely overweight. And this here was, he was being treated. We started, and I really didn't think he was going to follow through, but he did because he was desperate. Started to show up on other parts of his body. In the process of following the regimen, he lost a total of 52 pounds. And the end result, after 5 months, was this. Started to show a great change within it. The nails, you notice the improvement of the nails, right? And obviously, the lesions are retracting. In other words, indicates that the poisons no longer have to find this as a route to get out of the body. And then the man completely cleared up in about 6 months. But I didn't get to see him for about 8 months later. His hands are now this way. And this big thing you see over on the left wrist, I like to leave it there because he said even that was gone. But then he broke his diet again and started eating whatever he wanted. And this is what came back. But it shows you the rest of his hands are pretty clear. He's very happy. And this is one of the things psoriatic patients have got to be careful of. When they know they can get well, they go back to their old way. Except, of course, in the case of the children here, they didn't, so they stayed clear. But once a patient knows that psoriasis no longer dominates their life, they may fall into this trap. Go back to eating anything they want with the idea that, well, I know what to do. When I want to get rid of it, I'll just go back on the diet again. This is a dangerous practice, I find, because they won't go back on it. They're kidding themselves. It's like the person who wants to lose weight and they know I could lose weight. All I have to do is stop eating. Well, how many really do it? I never encourage them to take this attitude, but a lot of people do. They're pleased to know that they can get rid of the disease, so now I'm going to just do whatever I want. But most people who are sincere follow through completely. This is a form of psoriasis on the palms of the hands. Now, palms of the hand, this is the only place he had it. He had it for 14 years. Very hard, crusty, splitting. He had very little use of his hands. This was a very tedious case. In other words, it took a long time to start seeing results. But results we did see. In a few months, see the changes taking place. He was very pleased. And then by the time 14 months went by, and his hands were just about clear. Well, I haven't seen this man here since 1970. Then about 2 months ago, he comes prancing into the office, and I say to him, Larry, I said, tell me, how are your hands? So he showed me his hands. They've been that clear for 5 years. He really worked hard at it. And because he worked so hard at it, I asked him if he would be interested in coming here tonight to tell his story. And he did. So Larry Monahan is here with us. And this is a rare form. They claim that psoriasis on the palms of the hands and soles of the feet are the most difficult to clear. Larry, can you say hello to the audience? Right in from New Jersey. Well, we're happy you made it. Yeah, he didn't hesitate. When I told him what was happening, he decided to come here and testify to the fact that he was a successful case.
Well, as John is aware, I had psoriasis for 14 years, and it came about when I was taking chemistry in college. And at that time, the local dermatologist said it was contact dermatitis, and that with the application of some coal tar ointment and maybe a little cortisone salve, it would take care of it. Well, I visited dermatologists for the next 14 years, getting from coal tar ointment to cortisone salves to cortisone shots to Puva and oxysorylin treatments, and nothing was working. And I'm one of John's more reluctant patients because about 2 years before I met John, I was at a conference at Wagner College on Staten Island. A very charming woman came over to me and was looking at me picking some skin off my hands, which became my nervous tick, and said, "You know, young man, there's a cure for that." And I said, "Oh, yes, madam, I'm familiar with that, and I'm in it. I'm up at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center." And she looked at me very sadly and said, "Young man, you're never going to find it up there." So I figured, okay, I'll humor her, and I said, "Where?" And she said, "You write to Virginia Beach, the Edgar Cayce Foundation. They have an answer." So I said, "No, nothing to lose." So I became a member. And the first thing I ordered were the extracts on psoriasis, got them home, sat down, read them diligently. Very fortunate for me, or it should have been at the time, was the very last piece of paper in that extract was a case study by John. And here's a gentleman who's only 10 miles from my home, and I should simply get in my car, go up and see him. But I had a problem with that, because everything that was listed in that treatment that you should not eat was my diet. And everything that they said I should eat, I would never go near. So I resealed the extracts and mailed them back and did nothing. And then I went for the next round of treatments. And I was in the latest treatment. And I went for several weeks, and it made the condition worse. So I went back to the dermatologist who had sent me to Columbia, and I said, let's just go back on the cortisone salve to the point that you get relief without the highest concentration. And I walked out of his office with no prospect but heading downhill. So once again, I wrote to the foundation, got the extracts, read them again, and very reluctantly called Dr. Pagano. And I made the appointment with John. He spent a half an hour with me, and all he kept emphasizing was, you must do everything I tell you, and you must see it through. And I don't know, maybe I just looked like the great doubter, because he kept repeating that right out to the back door of his office that evening. But by the time I finally broke down and went to see Dr. Pagano, I was ready for the treatment. And looking at my hands tonight on the screen, I don't even remember that period of time that they were that bad. And it doesn't seem like a year. And sitting with John this afternoon, going over the dates, I didn't realize it took that long to clear up.
14 months.
14 months.
Before you
That really surprised me.
Yeah. That's the hardest part, to wait until you see a result beginning. Once the patient sees it beginning, then they know it works, and they'll follow through more readily. So, Larry, you're one of the most difficult type to clear up.
Yeah. I've always been difficult, John. But no, it's an amazing thing. And if I can just share with you a few things. As John had mentioned, I saw him recently, only about 2 months ago, because the psoriasis started to bother me again. But this time, I believe John said psoriatic arthritis or something.
Psoriatic arthritis.
Like that. And I hadn't been super religious about following my diet, and I wasn't drinking the teas anymore, and I hadn't obviously gone for manipulations, spinal manipulations. And since seeing John again, I'm starting to get that one point under control. But I was able to share with him, I have an excellent internist in New York City. He's one of the top people at Columbia Presbyterian. And my annual physical, I usually go in to see this fellow. And the first annual physical after meeting John, I sat down with him and he said, "How's your psoriasis?" And I said, "It's getting better." And his comment was, "Joe's finally helping you." Joe was the dermatologist he had sent me to. And I said, "No, I'm getting help someplace else." And he said, "Where?" And I told him. And he said to me, "That sounds interesting." And I said, "Did you ever hear of Edgar Cayce?" And he said, "The name's familiar, but no." So I said, "Okay, fine, it really works." And he immediately started to give me some medical explanation for why the diet might work. So, it was fine. We parted friends. And then I skipped my annual physical. And so it was 2 years since I had seen this man. But in that 2-year period of time, I received a call from him. And he called to ask me the name of the doctor who had treated me for psoriasis. And I said, sure. I looked up John's number and gave him the name and everything else. He said, because I've met a patient who has psoriasis, and I think the treatment that you had would be more appealing to her. And so I'd like to be able to refer this gal to your doctor. And I said, fine. And I didn't think anything of it because I really respect this internist and his willingness to try new things, because he managed to help my father greatly and kept my dad alive for a number of years, beyond a lot of other doctors who were willing to give up on him. And so I wasn't overly surprised. This December, when I went for my annual physical, I sat down with him and he was discussing Edgar Cayce with me. And he was discussing Edgar Cayce from the scientific standpoint. And he was throwing terms to me that I'm not familiar with. I'm not a microbiologist or a biochemist. And he's telling me things that are found in your body and how what Cayce made a recommendation for in this area, this by eating this food or having this herb, this had this impact on your body. And I thought this was really fascinating. So we chatted a little bit, and he started to tell me, he's a pulmonary specialist, and he started to tell me the great results he's having treating asthmatics with diet, and how he's created a database with his IBM AT, and he's cataloging and filing, and he's working with 1 or 2 other doctors on this treatment. And he said, I'm having such great results with this because I had a patient who's an emphysema sufferer, worse than your father ever got. And he said, I put him up in the hospital. I gave him everything we could. Nothing worked. He said, I had nothing to lose. So I put him on the diet I give my asthmatics. He says he's now out walking the street. Mm-hmm. So he said, I'm really concentrating on food allergies, allergens, hypersensitivity to certain food types, and this is what I'm really concentrating on. So I said to him, you're doing this with allergists? And he said, oh, don't give me those guys. They're quacks. So I said, he said, no, all they want to do is stick pins in you. I'm not doing that. So as he's doing the exam and we're going over things, he's telling me about his great work. And I finally said to him, how does this go down up at the hill there? And he said, real well. And I said, that really surprises me. And he said, well, I only tell them those things that I can prove scientifically. He said, that's why my database and my research is so important, because I never open my mouth in traditional circles until I have documented proof and a medical reason why what I'm doing in a holistic way works. And as I was shaking his hands going out the door, and this is something I have to thank the foundation for, and also John Pagano, as I was going out the door, he said, I've been looking forward to seeing you. And I said, oh, it's always good to see you. And he said, no, because I wanted to thank you, because it was you who triggered in my mind to treat people with the diet. And I said, why? He said, because you're one of the first people that I ever met who I knew not to be a flake, who had not been helped by what I considered excellent traditional medical care and had found relief someplace else. And he said, that made me start to think. Now, this fella is not a member of the A.R.E., but he owes a great deal to it. And I'm glad that I was the instrument, but John was a very big force in that.
So
Thank you.
he really thinks you're not afraid.
Yeah, I'm not afraid.
The information in this video is not intended to provide medical advice. The content is intended for educational purposes only. Any of the applications should not be used without consulting a licensed healthcare provider. The information presented is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.